Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody. Wow, my voice is all squeaky like a young teenage boy. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Paranormal Karen podcast. I love my guest today. He is an author. He is a friend. He has this fabulous podcast that I listen to when I'm on the road. Well, I listen to all the time, but I like to save them to when I'm driving, called Tripping on Legends. His name is Christopher Balzano. The best name, the best Massachusetts Italian name. Chris, how are you today?
Excellent. The first thing I want to talk about is loyalty. We're going to be talking about haunted love. How about loyalty? All right. My daughter absolutely adores you now.
Oh, no.
And now I'm not a big fan of lore. And it was tragic when my daughter started to want me to play that podcast for her all the time. And of course, I don't feel as bad the fact that she loves Jeff Belanger more than she loves me. But when I introduced her to Paranormal Karen this week, and she has been going around singing your theme song, I cannot get her to listen to an episode of my show she's not on. But Paranormal Karen plays throughout the house. So thank you very much for further isolating my tween daughter from me.
Well, tell her I said hello. What is her first name? Let's give her a shout out.
Ella James.
Hi, Ella James. My theme song, literally, like I do everything, I slapped it together and I went on Facebook and I was like, who wants to write a theme song? And that was the first one. My friend Joe, he was like, I was just kicking around, but it's an earworm. You can't get rid of it.
Yes, it totally is. I've been singing it myself. It's very Gary Shandling like.
Well, so now I said Massachusetts, but I know you're in Florida, and we are here. My people know that I tape early, so we're in August, but this is coming out the last weekend of September, which is perfect because that's when your book is coming out. And I even love your very first book that you wrote about ghost hunting that you seem to disparage right now, but it was great. I would still tell people to get it. I watched the DVD, and it came with a DVD. What is better than that?
Thank you very much. I think you're talking about Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film, which is an absolutely horrible book. It's kind of the essence. Writing that book, because it's actually, I think, my fifth book. Writing that book is the reason why I do what I do now, because the title implies that there is a surefire way to not only capture a ghost on film, but to be really witty and intelligent in telling other people why their ghost pictures are not true.
That is such a thing about the paranormal. But here's what I do know. I know the difference between analog and digital. I remember that. And because I feel like I once put together a paranormal trivia game, which, by the way, turns out people in the paranormal only know one genre. They usually don't know everything unless you're talking about you or a Jeff Belanger or somebody that it's our life. But I remember that. But also, you guys were in that awesome house in Boston, and it was good. But I feel like the paranormal field moves so fast that somebody was telling me about a podcast I did a long time ago, and I was talking about the ghost radar, which I still actually love. I know it's not a real thing, but it's a fun thing. This is what I say about the ghost radar. It doesn't work, but an intelligent entity can work with whatever you have.
Exactly. Exactly. They can manipulate whatever. So,
but somebody was like, don't you remember you came on my podcast and you showed me all the ghosts that were in my house? And I was like, oh my God, please tell me I did not go through your house with the ghost radar thinking it worked. But so we just keep moving forward.
It's so funny because we, Tim Weisberg and I, we wrote a book called Haunted Objects. And it's a really great book. Like I can clearly say that I wrote at least one book that I think is absolutely horrible. This book I really, really liked. And it was published by a company who their main source of books were like collecting stamps and how to knit and coin collecting. And then they're like, let's try to get into the ghost field. And so they wrote this book, and it was not promoted the right way. And Tim and I went out there, and we busted our butts trying to get. And within a year, it was in remainder. And within 3 years, the company was bought by another company, and then went bankrupt. And then, we have no idea, because they said you can buy as many books as you want for like $2 each. And so we each bought as many books as we could afford at that time. And I've just sold off the last of my stock, but I know there are thousands of copies somewhere in a warehouse. And I spent weeks trying to track it down. And we decided, because all the rights were reverted back to us, I'm like, why don't we self-publish it? We've already made our advanced money off of this. We've already made the money we made selling off the books. Why don't we just make it real cheap, and we'll republish it, and we'll kind of update some of the stories if we need to. And looking back on those books, now that was 10 years ago almost. Looking back on that book, it's like, oh my word, the way people think about ghosts and the way people think about even something like whether an object can be haunted or not has evolved so much in 10 years that I was reading some of the things I wrote, and I was like, I was ridiculous. Not only was I a bad writer, but I was like, why would I think this? And I go, I got this detail of this story wrong. And so it is honestly something that if we continue to just play the same ghost hunter games that we play and don't think of the paranormal in a different way and let that evolve, it just becomes the same story over and over again.
Yeah, it does. I actually, so I'm trying to put out at least a 15 to 20 minute special each year. That was my new goal, because I'm in a year one, so I'm going to do 9 of them. That shouldn't be too hard. And one of them, I totally lost what I was going to say. What happened there? We were talking about the paranormal evolving. All right, never mind. It went away. I guess 3 podcasts is too much in a day. You're going to have to hold this together, Chris. You're the one holding.
Thank God for editing. I'm just not even going to let you talk, Karen.
Oh, no. I don't edit. There's no editing on Paranormal Karen. In fact, half the time people hear me go, I'm going to pause this. And then there's no pause and the podcast continues because they can't hear what happens after the pause.
That's funny.
But so I'm doing one on a Fae attachment, and I would have never known anything about Fae before. But, with this book, if you guys are updating it, you need to know my friend Calvin Von Crush, who is, there's a movie about him on, I think it's on Netflix now, or it's on Amazon, and he is the occult collector. And he collects, he has the skeleton of a French prostitute, he has Ouija board. If you think you have a hexed or a cursed item, he builds a museum into his house, and he's in Connecticut. And
it's what we're planning on doing is actually doing that and then kind of hitting people up with, and we're going to come up with a much better title, but like Haunted Objects 2.
Right.
Or like more haunted objects. But what's his name? Calvin Von Crush?
Yes. And I will introduce you to him. He's fascinating. And I was just talking to him the other day, and he's like, Karen, I got a hex jar and it smells like death. And I'm like, yeah. Don't call me. And he's a non-believer. So when he's like, it smells like death, I'm like, yeah, don't call me when that opens itself up. And he's like, yeah, the lights keep flickering in my apartment. And I'm like, yeah, I got to get off the phone now, Kelvin. But you and he's fabulous. You guys will have a blast. But you have a new book out, and I love, I have my tissues ready if you're going to make me cry. Because it's about...
Oddly enough, when most people read my work, they cry. So,
and those are just your professors. Hello,
exactly.
I'll be here all week. Tell us the premise. Tell us the premise.
Well, I've been doing. As I've kind of said, the idea of investigating, I just got burnt out on that, and I wanted to create something new, which. I sometimes don't know whether I'm ahead of everybody else or I'm just behind like the past generation. So what I decided to do was to, instead of investigate, legend trip. And that involved finding a story and finding what people of a certain town or certain area said was a famous haunting. almost always outside, like not something, I don't like haunted restaurants or things like that, although I've done them, but more of like, on this stretch of road is said to walk a girl named Julia. And then what we did was we did a ton of research into the history of the town, the history of the legend, how was the legend changed. And then what we would do is we would go out to that location and we would use something within the legend itself as a trigger to try to experience the haunting as opposed to capture the haunting, right? So investigators are obsessed with getting evidence. Evidence to us is irrelevant. It's all about the experience, right? Because that's what truly converts believers to non-believers, or that's what your average person, that's the prism they see the paranormal through. And so I started the podcast, Tripping on Legends, with that idea and with that theory. And we went out, and especially in our first 3 years, we went out and we did like 60 different Florida legends.
Wow.
And about in year 2.5, patterns emerge, right? Because folklore and how we try to explain a haunting tells usually a lot more about who we are than about what the ghosts are, right? We experience the unknown. We have to process it with the brain that we have. And so we fall back on classic stories, classic legends that make sense to people, right? Because you want them to believe something happened. So you want to give them a story that they can relate to as well.
And I remember what I forgot a few minutes ago. And it fits in perfect here, which was when I'm using a real paranormal story now for one of the specials, but I was always trying to write a fake story, and in ghost stories end 3 ways. There are only 3 endings. And one is, and then we found out it was the guy that owned the house. Okay.
Right.
And the other one is, let me see if I can even get them. That's the place where she died. We find out that's the place where she died. And the third one is the wild card, which would be something demonic, and then it's gone, or something terrible, right, and then it's gone. So this is exactly what the reason I brought that back up is because exactly what you're explaining about the experience and stuff like that is I'm with you. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And we're never concerned with whether the ghost is real or not, right, because most of the time what it is something paranormal does happen, right? And maybe it's a one-time incident, but usually for most of these legends, it's something that has happened multiple times. And so people have fallen back on the story that they know to explain it. And the more that the story they know makes sense, the more people will believe that they experienced the haunting, right? So it's like, if you can believe the idea that post-traumatic stress disorder, let's start with a happy thing, is a real thing.
Yes.
Right?
I
then
hope
all
everyone
of these
does, yes.
Right. And then all of these hauntings that are the result of someone coming back from war and committing suicide at a certain location, that makes sense to me. That's in the news, right? I can imagine that. And so the ghost story that you're telling me and the fact that you're seeing a man hanging from a bridge makes sense to me because the backstory does.
Got it.
Right. And not only that, but it tells us what we're afraid of. It tells us what we desire. It tells us how we view our own lives, And so doing this for so long, probably, like I said, after 2.5 years, we started to jokingly say during the podcast all the time, #haunted love. Because so many of these backstories had to do with some sort of love. It had to do with some sort of passion or connection to something, or your desire for something is so great that even in death, you go back to it. And from that, I just started to...
Yes, that actually, and what is the staple of the hauntings, the real good ones, is that their emotions, are still there. I remember in Utah, they have a place that the woman's heart is broken because her son didn't come home from Vietnam, so it's a broken heart. Yes, perfect.
Right. And I even remember these from, the first ghost stories, even before I was like looking into this stuff. The great the woman, that gothic tale of like the woman still walking the widow's walk, waiting for her husband, the captain, to come home, or
Resurrection Mary, still trying to get to the
Resurrection
dance.
Mary. Exactly. And so what I started to realize is that, what is a great framing for a book, right? And my idea was, I love telling stories, and I love getting out and telling stories, and I wanted a calling card, right? I wanted a book of Florida things because I've been so anti-Florida, man. Like, I'm from New England. I don't like it down here,
I get it.
But I realized that, like, someone who lives in Orlando, Florida, may or may not want to hear about the Bridgewater Triangle, right? But I can get out there and I can connect with people, and I can actually get more stories for the show if I'm going around with a Florida book. So I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do the geographical area because we really kind of hit all over,
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted the book to be genuine in terms of I've experienced or I've been to each of these places. And quite frankly, I'm a teacher. It was summertime. I wanted to finish the book in 2 months. So what better way than if I've already done all the background research for? And so, I said, well, how about, to Arcadia History Press, how about Haunted Love? And they jumped on it, which was really weird because they're a geographical place, right? They want Haunted Tampa. They want Haunted Miami. But they love this idea of all of these ghost stories that are based in this idea of love. And it's not always romantic love. It's kind of split into, romantic love, like I love you, you love me, or usually the opposite, I love you and you don't love me.
Yes, that's always the story.
But also, also in there are stories of like a parent's love for children.
Right.
And then also a lot of stories that involve someone doing something that they love so much that they go back to their job after their death, or for some reason they can't leave the place where they used to have so much fun or used to go and enjoy themselves so much. So it's not just like a woo romantic kind of thing going on. You can still buy it for, your boyfriend or girlfriend on Valentine's Day. But there's also those other kind of love that's represented too.
Sure, it's about emotional love, and I'm glad because I always say to people there are only. I don't like romantic stuff. I only like 2 romantic movies, Ghost and What Dreams May Come, and in both those movies, the men are dead. So,
right.
And this is interesting because I dish on Florida all the time because it deserves it. But
it does.
but the stories, because Florida is so kind of off the mark, must have been really it must have not have been that hard to find these stories.
It's interesting because I always used to joke around that that Massachusetts was the original green state because they reused everything, right? So you had some place that used to be a mental health facility, which then becomes a jail, which then becomes a tuberculosis hospital, which then becomes, a juvenile detention facility. So 13-year-olds can be where the criminally insane used to play. And it really is the same here in Florida. We don't think of Florida as being old, right? We don't, but it is technically the first, the first kind of place where people started to settle, the Spanish and even before the Spanish, the French Huguenots. And so when you're looking for these stories, the difference in Florida is that rather instead of using the old, they just destroy the old and then they build new things on it, or a hurricane on it, right? And so what you have are these stories of that ultimately are, it's supposed to be about a guy and a girl. But if you look back 100 years ago, they were telling the same story, but it was 2 Native Americans, and so it's interesting to read it, to discover, I should say, the history that's here, because I've always poo-pooed it, right? I'm always like, I've got that puffed out New England attitude of like, well, we were here first, our history's better. And what I found is that there's such a diverse way of approaching history in the different parts of Florida that you often had to like peel things back, which as a researcher I love.
See, now that's interesting. So, and Florida is so culturally diverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. It's, I mean, I feel like Florida's a little more like California. People think Texas, but Florida, through the airport, you must have every nationality working there.
Yeah, it's funny because each of these places has its own personality, and that's the focus of Tripping on Legends: is how is this story a reflection of the personality of the community, right? And so I live in the most culturally armpitted place in Florida, which is I live in Southwest Florida. I live in Cape Coral, which like Fort Myers, which my people only know it because here it's where the Red Sox train, right?
I've played Fort Myers. I have played
Myers
trailer parks many times. And those people show up with their coolers and are ready to have fun. So, but I do know, don't look for a fancy, yes, I know where you are.
Right. But the other part of it is that there are very few people here that are from Florida. This is probably the most transient part. And so you don't get the culture of a community until you've had time to cultivate it, right? Ooh, that's a nice phrase. I'm going to write that down. But the idea is that most of the people here are from the Midwest, or we have a large German population, right? And so you don't have generations of stories because you don't have generations of people here,
or generations passing them down.
Exactly. And so once I moved out of this area, which unfortunately means a lot of driving because everything in Florida is really spread out. Yeah. I was able to find so many of these stories. And the weird thing is that as I've discovered these stories, it often involves taking another writer's work and saying, oh my word, you're so wrong. You got this wrong.
Wow.
Which as a folklorist, I embrace that because so many of my stories have been passed to other people wrong, right? Which is what I consider myself. I don't consider myself an investigator. I'm a folklorist. I'm a storyteller. And so I'm looking at these stories saying, oh my word, like I can actually track on the internet how you thought that this was right, but it was so wrong because if you had just gone to the location, you would have seen this. And when I do like talks in front of people at libraries, I love that kind of setup and then pull the rug out from underneath them and be like, oh, you thought that that's what the story was, but in actuality, it's something completely different.
And hold on one second. We're going to come right back. And that's a big issue with the paranormal. Hold on, folks. We'll be right back. Paranormal Karen here with some comedy dates. October 16th and 17th, you can see me in Lowell, Arkansas. I'm so excited. Arkansas was one of the states I haven't played. I believe there's only one left. So October 16th and 17th, I will see you at the Grove Comedy Club. My first time, so excited, in Lowell, Arkansas. And also in October, the 30th and 31st for Halloween, you can see me at the Halloween Extravaganza at the Cambry House, which is in Illinois, but go to cambryhouse.com, CAMBRE house.com, and take a look at the event, and hope to see you there. That's going to be tarot and ghost hunting and a show. It's going to be a little bit of everything. All right, everybody, leave me 5 stars for the podcast. Now let's get back to it. Okay, so I have a friend named Craig who I'm going to find and promote his episode, because what he does is he goes into the ghost lore and he looks for inconsistencies. For example, there's a place here called Glen Tavern, and they had a very famous medium come through, and she said, oh, yes, a prostitute had her head cut off here. And and then that went right on Ghost Adventures, and then it went in a book, and then it went blah, 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 blah. And it keeps going. And then my friend Craig comes in and goes through it historically, and is like, no, this wasn't even a brothel then, blah. He gets the whole story.
Right.
So that's a fascinating. Do you love that? I would hate doing that much research.
I do. You know, it's funny because I remember the first time I went on a ghost tour in Boston. And the tour guide is literally telling me my personal story and getting it wrong. Because it had been featured in books and things like that. And I didn't say anything at the time. And I talked to him afterwards. I'm like, hey, like, that story you were telling, it's the infamous federal government Ouija board story. And I'm like, hey, that story, like, where'd you get that? And he said, I got it from a book. And I'm like, well, isn't it kind of different in the book? I think I've read it. And he said, oh, yeah, but people weren't really responding to this part of it. And so I changed it a little bit. And I'm like, I felt like kissing the man. As a folklorist, I felt like kissing the man because I was like, thank you. Like, that's how things change, right? And so if I'm concerned about evidence, if I'm concerned about truth, yeah, that might be aggravating to me. And it's the same thing with, I think we talked about the last time with this Pukwudgie things, in terms of people have taken kind of their whatever they need from that mythical beast and they've attached it. Or I've said something in an interview about strawberries, and then all of a sudden I find it on the internet that it's like, this in stone thing now that to defeat Pukwudgies, all you need is strawberry milkshakes, and it's like, and I don't care. And I don't care that my name's not attached to either of those things, because I just love the fact that I can then look back and say, oh, wow, like that changing tells a lot about what the people coming to Boston need to hear, right? Like what the tourist needs to hear about this location, because someone realized that the story wasn't quite good enough and tweaked it.
Well, but then doesn't it lose its history?
I guess the history in part is in the looking. Right. So if you just take, in other words, people, if that story hadn't changed from Boston, people might have stopped looking at the old Charles Gate Hotel, which is now condos. They would have stopped looking at that house at all. They would have stopped looking at that building at all because it was no longer important. But at least the ghost story kept the idea of the location alive. So, and that was kind of enough for me.
So don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Exactly, because people are still remembering it. I can give you a good example if you'd like.
Sure.
So in one of the stories that we have, I should keep saying we. One of the stories that I have in the new book is about Bloody Bucket, right? And the story of Bloody Bucket it's in Wauchula, Florida, is that there was a woman. Sometimes her name is Mary, because you always need a good Mary in a story. Other times I think it's Edmilla or something like that. And she delivered babies. She was I always, when I get to this point, forget what that term is, but she helped deliver babies.
Okay.
Karen, help me, please. What is that called?
She was a midwife?
Midwife, thank you. I always want to say handsmaid, but it's a midwife, right?
I don't like children, so I've blocked all these out. So you can't come back.
Excellent.
To the well
or being a midwife either, right, which is like being a mom, but a lot grosser.
Messy,
anyway,
yeah.
So she was. Most of the stories say that she was a freed slave. This is kind of post Civil War, which is what a lot of the Florida legends, they kind of are from that era. That's where their origins are. And she, for different reasons, some say she just became obsessed with this idea of population control. Others say she did it because so many of her kids were taken away when she was still a slave. But she began to kill the babies that she was delivering. Wow. And she would say that they were born, they were stillborn, or they had died right after, or they were dead when she delivered them. And she would take the remains of the child down to this part of the river, of the Peace River, and she would dump the bodies. And then she would, wash out the bucket, and she would dump the afterbirth and all this stuff like that. And then eventually they kind of caught on to it, and they fired her from her job, right?
Sounds like her Yelp review is like 0 and 10.
Right, exactly.
Someone
and so
look into this. Okay.
Yeah, right. Like, how many does it exactly take before? But I hope that just the mere fact that we're joking about it tells you how ridiculous of a backstory that actually is, right?
Oh, good. Okay, got it.
And so she went crazy. And she spent her days with her husband down by this bridge, right under this bridge, and she would continue her work. And she would dump these babies that were not there, and she would wash her buckets out, and she would imagine, she'd have these hallucinations that her buckets would be filled with blood. And this continued until she either killed herself or she just became so crazy that she slipped and fell into the water and died.
Okay.
And it's now said that if you go to Bloody Bucket Bridge on Bloody Bucket Road, which are all nicknames, then by the light of the full moon, you will and you fill your bucket full of water in front of your eyes. The water will turn blood red.
Okay.
And if you go there on other nights, you can hear the babies crying. And you can even hear the splashing, her scream as she kind of falls into the water and the splashing of the water. And this seems to be a fairly new legend, right? This seems to be, so even though the backstory takes place a long time ago, you can't track this legend for very long. As a matter of fact, you can only track it about as far back as the book Weird Florida by Charlie Carlston. And so we became obsessed with this, like this whole idea of like being able to fill, like imagine if we could go out there. We went out there. And actually when Tripping on Legends went out there, it was not only a full moon, but it was the blood moon.
Ah.
And we filled our buckets and we got absolutely nothing. Like it didn't fill with blood or anything like that. We didn't hear babies crying, but we heard a lot of splashing because that area of the Peace River is loaded with alligators.
Oh, geez.
So it makes sense that you would hear these weird noises and stuff like that. So it's just really cool legend.
You weren't near the alligators. Now I'm worried about your safety near the alligators because I hate alligators.
Tripping on Legends has spent much more time in contact with alligators than with actual ghosts.
Oh.
And we've run into a lot of ghosts, but we've run into a lot more alligators.
Okay, so now we got a detour for 1 second. You've run into...
Okay, but then we got to make our way back.
Oh, we will. I won't leave this. But did they chase you, or what happens? Or they just make a lot of noise and smile, that little grin at the back of their mouth?
Yeah, it's one of those things where they always kind of... It's weird by daylight, because we've run into some during daylight. In daylight, they seem to want to hide. And at nighttime, they seem to want you to know they're there so you'll go away. It's almost like they couldn't even be bothered killing you at night. So during the day, like we run into, one of the stories I cover is in Mayaca, which is in Sarasota, Florida, which I'm sure you've played Sarasota.
I have played. I've played everywhere in Florida. I've played everywhere in Florida.
And I remember the first time I went there was by myself just to kind of check it out. And I'm sitting there, I was standing there on a bridge, and I'm like, I can't believe it. This is like a dream come true. I'm watching alligators in the wild, and they're only like 20 feet away from me, and I can see them going up and down the water. And I look to my right, and about 10 feet away, one is crossing the road to go into that pond. And I was like, oh, my word. So, yes, we have run into alligators on a lot of our legend trips. And they actually explain a lot of ghost stories.
Oh, well, they can climb over fences now, too.
Yeah, and I also heard that they can vote. So I'm really interested to see how the elections go here in Florida. So
okay, so I diverted you, but I have a real issue with alligators.
Okay, I won't mention them again.
Okay, so you're back at there, and then you get no evidence from the Bloody River.
Right, the Bloody Bucket on the Peace River, and so is that a defeat? Right? Is that like a we didn't get any evidence, but we were able to kind of trace this history. But then what we found is that pre-Weird Florida, there was a woman who was writing maybe 2 years, I think it is, before Carlson wrote his book, said, and it's clearly right there. Like it didn't even take a genius to find it. It's a blog post on a website that says from that area of Florida. And she says, hey, I really want – all you guys are saying that you really like my fiction writing. Here's what I'm going to do. For Halloween, I'm going to write a fictionalized account of why they call this road Bloody Bucket Road and why they call it Bloody Bucket Bridge. Let me know what you guys all think about my fake story, because this is a fake story. It's not real. And she wrote the story, and it was the exact story that the legend is, right? And so you take a step back and you say, okay, well, we have to assume that he's a genuine person, right? Because I know people who know him. I know people who have seen his research. And the story's out there, right? The stories that he has taken real accounts of people who have had experiences there. Coughing, sorry. So what it is people have really heard babies crying in that area. And it's actually a boat launch now. And people fish there. People have heard babies crying in that area and can't explain it. But they hear this story about this midwife who was killing all these children, and it makes sense to them, right? We went there. My daughter and I went there during the day when I was trying to get pictures for the book last summer. And yeah, there are certain times, I've been there several different times. There are certain times when that water is so, there are so many minerals in it, and there's so much cast off that it is red. It's red with it, and this dark brown instead of being its natural color. And so when my old co-host and I were at that location during the blood moon, the cops rolled up on us. And we're always like, she is her ex-husband is a police officer, and I'm always respectful anyway. And so we have it down. We say, I'm sorry, we're folklorists. We're here to do this story. And we've never had trouble. We've run into cops a few times.
And you're white. That's helpful.
That is always helpful, especially in any part of Florida. Yes. And so, excuse me, we ended up talking to the guy, 2 cops, and we told him what we were there. And he's like, I've never heard that story, but I can tell you why this is called Bloody Bucket Road. And I had heard the story, but I wanted to get this confirmation. So I'm like, all right, why is it? And he's like, well, down at the end of the road, there used to be a really nasty bar. And every night, it was famous because every night they would have to mop up all of the blood and then dump these bloody buckets out the back door because so much fighting had gone on and people had lost teeth and blah, blah, blah. And so instead of I think it was called the Red Apple. Instead of the Red Apple, people started to call it the Bloody Bucket. And so this became the Road to Bloody Bucket or Bloody Bucket Road. And that became Bloody Bucket Bridge. And wow. Does any of that make the haunting not real? No, because it seems as if people have actually had experiences there, although they can be kind of explained away. Does it make the legend less that I was able to find that this person never existed and it was actually named after a bar? No, it makes it more fun. Like, what better way to tell the history of Wauchula than to tell you about how its folklore got it wrong?
Well, you know what else, though? I bet the experiences that they're having also could be a tulpa. Isn't that where enough people think it starts to happen?
Oh, I love you, Karen, because that's exactly where I was going to go.
Okay.
I think so many of these locations have activity that are connected to them that or have stories that are connected to them that people go there that either we actually create the legends that we tell, or B, ghosts find their way there or things find their way there because they know people will be there to hear them.
Right.
So another one of the stories that we get into in the book, that I get into in the book, is about this Shiloh Cemetery in Sanford, which is outside of Orlando. And there supposedly is a skeleton redhead. Now, I love redheads, but I don't love skeleton redheads. And she
eat something. And you know what, too? That just reminds me, because I'm 2 steps behind everything today. That's where almost always when you get hauntings and you hear little kids' voices, you're never supposed to trust that it's a little kid, because maybe you're right. Like, there's a ghost standing there pretending to be a baby, working on its baby impression, right?
Right. Exactly. And, well, not only that, but, sorry, I'm really coughing. I haven't even mentioned the A word yet.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Like I said, we don't edit, but maybe everyone at home is coughing. I have a bunch of incense in my house that I can't stop sneezing. Okay.
We actually have an entire episode that we dedicate to crybaby bridges. And the phenomenon of people hearing crying children at bridges. And a lot of it has to do with, depending on whether it's covered or not, because they're both of them are experienced this way. It has to do with the water running over rocks, and it has to do with kind of the geography and the architecture of bridges themselves. That so many of these bridges have ghost stories that involve people crying, because there's something distorting this normal sounds that we would hear, and we would be able to look at it during the day and be like, oh, that's just a babbling creek. Well, at night, a babbling creek or a bridge over a babbling creek, becomes demonic children or children who were dumped because they were overpopulating Florida.
Right. You can never overpopulate Florida. You can never. There's enough alligators to handle that. Wow.
Exactly.
I almost love that name though, the Crybaby Bridge.
Yeah, that's not, I didn't make it up. It's a phenomenon that's out there that people can actually Google it, and they can see all these different crybaby bridges. I think what we wanted to do was, there was a really bad, because I'm into all types of folklore and urban legends. So there's this urban legend about this movie called Crybaby Bridge that was on Nickelodeon. That Nickelodeon got so many calls from parents that it was too graphic for children that they pulled it, and it's never been aired again. And so I went on the search for this movie. Is this movie true? And it ended up being, it was just a really, really bad movie. And Nickelodeon vowed that it was so bad they would never show it again. But it involves crybaby bridges. And so that became our opportunity we watched the movie. We talked about the elements of folklore and how bad it was. And then we talked about the phenomenon of crybaby bridges all across America.
Wow. And hold that right there. We're going to be right back, folks. Hang on. I love that. Oh, Nickelodeon. It's just so bad. Let's start a rumor. Psychic medium and buddy of mine, Terry Huberman, is with me today. Terry, you've given me so many great readings and healings, and now you've got everything together in one package. Tell me about that.
I sure do. So this package has energy healings, readings, and coaching.
Coaching, that's the best. And people, they buy the package. You give them coaching once a week?
Yeah, so we meet online once a week, and in between, there's support as well.
And who would this be for?
This is really for folks who are in indecision, needing to get into their intuition because they're blocked or stuck. They need to move forward. And so we explore what the root causes of the problems are.
And helps them get out of their own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terrific. And what can they expect from this?
Sure. So moving from anxiousness to confidence, accessing their freedom, joy, and security, and really being in alignment with themselves so they have that clear direction, so they know, aha, this is what I need to do next to reach my goals.
So now there's something that's free so people can talk to you and see if this is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. On my website, terryhuberman.com, there is a page where you can click, and it's the intuitive coaching package. And there is a button there that says schedule a free call. So you go ahead, schedule it. We'll get on a call and you can learn more about this program, and we'll see if this is a good fit for you or not.
See if there's chemistry.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's an odd date.
terryhuberman.com, TerrieHuberman. I highly recommend it, folks. Okay, so are any of these stories true heartbreak or love stories? Like Resurrection Mary is a love story in Chicago.
Yeah. I probably one of my favorites in this collection is about Stetson University and the kind of emotional center of the campus is this structure called Hully Tower. And the story goes that during the early days of Stetson University, this woman fell in love. She was one of the first groups of women that were allowed into the school. She fell in love, Suzanne Brown was her name, with her professor. He was a young man. He was a young college professor, and they fell in love, an English professor, because they're the most dreamy.
Photography was my taste. Photography professor was my taste.
Okay, I'm an English teacher, so I guess it was just hopeful, wishful thinking there.
Okay.
And she they fell in love, and they would meet to make out at Hully Tower. And the affair lasted a year. And then the next year, in the fall, some people saw it, and they told the administration that this teacher and a student were making out at Hully Tower late at night. He was immediately fired and disgraced, and she was thrown out of the college. And she was asked, to clean out her dorm room. And so she went to her dorm room and cleaned it out. And she was accompanied by a police officer for some reason. She eluded him. She climbed to the top of Hully Tower. She recited her name and the name of the man she loved, and gripping a ribbon he had given her and a poem he had written for her, she jumped from Hully Tower and committed suicide. And this isn't romantic at all. Every fall, they say that if you go to Hully Tower at nighttime, you can hear this woman screaming her name, and you can actually see her falling and jumping from the tower itself. And this is like a famous ghost that is seen at Stetson University.
But this again is almost like Crybaby Bridge. There's a lot of towers that women are jumping off of with ribbons.
Exactly. And it's unfortunate that a lot of the love that is in Florida, Haunted Florida love stories, a lot of the love is suicidal love.
Right.
But that's supposed to be kind of the point of this, is that we that's the explanation that we need, right?
And don't we all wish there was it's like, I would love to meet the guy that made me suicidal. Like I've not met that guy.
I was just having this argument with someone, whether it's true love or whether it's our ideal romanticized version of love, the person who can't live without us, right? We might not have reached that depth ourselves, but we understand that idea because we've been broken up with, or we've been hurt so bad that we can understand the ratcheted up idea of that.
Right, but you see that, even when you see the Beatles play and those girls are crying and screaming, I can't. What is that? I would love to meet the person that I can't live without, that would make me cry and scream. That's my new goal.
You should see my daughter listening to Paranormal Karen, because she gets like that.
I'm her Beatles.
So we went to Stetson on our summer trip 2 years ago. And the funny thing is that, it would be impossible for anybody to see a suicide, a reenactment of a suicide from Hully Tower, because it's only about 30 feet high now, because they've essentially taken the entire thing down because it's a hurricane hazard.
Okay.
And it would be impossible for anyone to see a suicide from Hully Tower, because no one has ever committed suicide on the campus of Stetson University. And it would be impossible for someone to see that suicide, because there was no Hully Tower until about 1915 or about 20 years after the story takes place. And it's funny because I'm not going to mention the author of the book, but there is a book that tells this story, which you have to imagine it has been told before, right? She's just repeating the story. And there's a picture, and we found the picture when we were researching at Stetson. We got into their archives, and we said, that's the guy. That's the English teacher who was disgraced and had to move away. And the archivist, the librarian, said, that's like the third president of Stetson. She's like, 2 years after this picture, he became the interim president, and then eventually ran the college for 20 years.
What a disgrace.
However, Hully Tower actually is even more romantic than that, right? Uh-huh. Because it is the burial place of oh my word, I can't believe I can't remember their names right now, but it is the couple who the tower is named after. Her name, I believe, is Elise. And
I'm having this effect on everyone. No one can remember anything around me. It's like I'm in Congress. It's like I'm a witness in Congress. No one can remember.
That's funny. Your Honor, I don't remember that. So one of the founders of the campus created this tower mainly for his wife because he loved her so much, and it was to house her bells, right? So she loved bell music. It ended up becoming kind of one of the things that Stetson is most known for. And he wanted Eloise was her name, and he wanted a place to store her bells. And the weird thing is that he died, I think, weeks before the tower itself was finished. She ended up living for another 30, 40 years. But they're both buried at the base of Hully Tower.
Oh, I thought you were going to say she married a disgraced English professor.
And his Midwestern Suzanne. No, like they actually found each other in death.
Wow.
Because the story that more people tell, if you actually go onto the campus of Stetson, is that in the morning hours, right before dawn, you can see a couple walking the campus of Stetson near Hully Tower. And it's thought to be Lincoln and Eloise Hully. And it's thought to be that they, even though their deaths are decades apart, even though the area that he built for her is essentially gone now, it is a mausoleum. It's a monument to their love. And they actually are still seen together in love on that campus. And that's the story that people on the campus tell.
Oh, I like that story better. Do people like the other story, the woman leaping to her death?
Well, the funny thing is that I have not been able to find anyone who actually knows the Suzanne story. Everyone instead knows the couple walking the grounds story.
You know, this is such a weird offshoot, but I remember someone once showed me a picture that I do believe they captured something, but it didn't look like people. They were on the other side of the mountain. Like one of them kind of looked like a skeleton and the other one was all blurry. And it was a couple that looked like they were sitting next to a fountain laughing. Like she looked like she was leaning against him, like he had just said the funniest thing. And I love that picture of horrible skeletons laughing. But I love that story. That's my favorite story now, that the couple is still walking around the campus.
And it's interesting because people have said that Hully Tower is one of the most haunted places in that part of Florida. And it's kind of western central Florida. And people have talked about, it's interesting because, we were talking about haunted objects, this idea that the tower was taken down. The bells were scattered all throughout campus, and everywhere that the bells are on campus now has another ghost story attached to it.
Oh,
so almost as if that spiritual energy is now spread throughout the campus. And it's interesting because, Hully Tower is, for the people of Stetson, very much the center of campus, even though it's not the center. You go there and you put your hand on it. If you're going to take an especially hard test. And if a test you haven't studied for, then you rub the bricks. And you even ask the Hullies to help you with it. It's also
I have
the
one of those
site.
Every time I pay my bills. I just rub and hope.
Is your name Hully? Can I rub you, please?
It's just a tower in my house. Please let the check clear.
But, even before it was taken down, people would talk about the bell ringers because you had to be highly trained to ring these bells. Like it was an honor to do so, right? Not that it was difficult to do. It was just like an honor to do it. People would they would just talk to Eloise every time they were there. They would hear her voice and they would sometimes feel her like patting them on the back. And even it's when they were tearing it down, if you look at the archives in the newspapers, both of the campus, but then also of the Orlando Sentinel, as they're covering the story, people said, "Well, I hope the ghosts don't go away when you take the building away." And it's really unusual to have the average person in the comment section of an article comment about the ghosts, that the ghosts there were just so common, or at least the ghost story was just so common that everyone knew it, and that they associated the building itself and they associated the history of the building with its ghosts, and you couldn't separate them.
Okay, so now your opinion. say you're on board with this. Are they the spirits of these two? Are they pieces of the spirits? Are they residuals? What do you think? Or you're just like, I don't know. This is just a nice story.
I definitely don't think they're residual because they died at different times.
Okay.
And they're doing an action that no one has ever said that they did, which was walk the campus hand in hand together. And so I honestly think, and I think that their spirits were so much with each other that they stayed together, almost kind of like that last episode of Lost, spoilers, where their spirits or their energy or their essence was waiting for everyone to pass so that they could go on together, right? And I think that there is a juice on that campus which ignites the recording that is trapped in those bricks, which just projects the passion that those two felt for each other.
Wow.
So I really think it's a case of these tumblers all falling in. And when we went there and we went to experience that, it was, I talked about evidence versus experience. And I have nothing to show you for that night. I have nothing that proves what happened. There's a Facebook Live that we did, and we kind of talk about the history of it. But there was a very clear moment when we were at that tower before dawn where the energy on the campus changed. And we stood there both experiencing the same thing, which were these shadow type, but not in the spooky like shadow man or kind of idea, but just as if we were catching almost like the negative of something, of people walking across the campus or going from tree to tree. We'd see kind of a quick flash and then a quick flash somewhere else. And it was unexplainable. Snapped pictures, nothing came out, but we both were caught in that moment of realizing that there was ghostly energy traveling right next to us on campus, and it was in the kind of the shadow. If it was sun out, the shadow of this tower, and we were catching a glimpse of energy, of activity on campus, which, like I said, I believe kind of ignites it. And then, exactly at the same time, we looked at each other like, "It's over!" Wow! Like it was almost as if being caught in a bubble to experience the paranormal for this 30 seconds, and then it was over. And when it was over, and this happens a lot to us on legend trips, and when it was over, we both looked at each other and were like, we can go. Like, that's it. That was it. That was like the moment that we were here for. And it like deeply changed me.
So it was,
and I'm someone who's experienced ghosts. It totally, I mean, we spent the entire day in the archives, in the basement of the library at Stetson doing research, which I absolutely love. We spent the mid-afternoon, a professor, we happened to walk in, it was a professor I had talked to via email. Randomly, I saw him on the campus. We spent the late afternoon going into, because we were looking at our pictures during kind of an early dinner, and we realized that we captured what looked like people coming down the stairs in one of the dorms in one of the buildings that has a ghostly legend attached to it. We wanted to go back there. But then we spent the night like experiencing this very real moment. So it really had every single thing that I look for in the paranormal world.
Wow. It sounds like that college. It sounds like you would love that college. You should work at that college.
I should. It's only 3 hours away. So.
Oh, there you go. So also the love stories mostly seem to surround around women that have been, whatever. It's a little, it's either very Me Too ghost story, or a, or a love. Are there any about young men? Like, people don't like stories about young men in love, do they?
They don't. It's not as powerful. I mean, I have this area known as Indian Springs Cemetery, in Punta Gorda. And I know Punta Gorda has that big kind of comedy club, so I know you've played in that. It's like Vivicia's or something. And it has several different ghosts that involve love. And one of them is of a man named Mac McGraw. And Mac, I'm going to give you the short version of the story. Mac McGraw, oddly enough, owned a bar that was nicknamed the Bloody Bucket. So here we have Bloody Bucket Part 2. Oh. But his Bloody Bucket, his name came from the fact that his wife, Ma McGraw, used to make moonshine, and then she would put a ton of strawberry syrup in it because they owned kind of like a candy shop. And it was the most famous alcohol in this dry county in Florida. And so people used to order the Bloody Bucket, and I can only imagine that that's the most disgusting thing, but even kids would drink it. It was famous for it. And he was killed. He was killed in a robbery. Someone broke into the house, and he was able to, he was shot 8 times. Wow. In the back, and yet somehow still made it to the back room of the Bloody Bucket to grab his rifle and shoot the perpetrator, shoot the intruder, even though only one gun was ever found.
Okay.
That's because everyone pretty much agrees that Ma McGraw is the person who actually killed her husband.
I thought they made him quite a hero with those 8 shots in his. That was like a.
I know, it's like the magic bullet theory all over again. And most people agree, because it was kind of widely known in the town, that her lover actually helped with the murder, and her lover is this guy by the name of Dick Wyndham, right?
Worst historical name ever, Dick Wyndham.
Ever. And he was kind of a big wig in the early politics of Charlotte County. Now, the funny thing is, or not funny thing is that if you go to Indian Springs and look at Mac McGraw's grave, he's not buried right next to his wife. Oh. Instead, he's buried next to Dick Wyndham. So all 3 are now dead. Ma McGraw is all the way to the left. Dick Wyndham is in the middle. And then Mac McGraw is on the other side of Dick, which sounds really weird, but you get what I'm saying.
I know. I had to stop. I had to process.
Right? And isn't that, have you ever heard of that? Like if someone who had 2 husbands, like maybe she would be in the middle and they would be, on either end. But his ghost is known to walk that cemetery because of that murder, and kind of have this kind of love triangle. Imagine being not only buried near the person who killed you, but have that person who killed you be between you and the woman that you loved. That the foolish love is what kind of caused you to die.
Salt in the wound.
Salt in the wound, and it's funny because Dick Wyndham is also said to be responsible for the death of Marshall Bowman, and Marshall Bowman is buried maybe 30 yards away. Wow. And he was a police officer who was kind of brought in to clean up Charlotte County in the early days, and he was so good at his job that he was assassinated. Wow. And he was shot through the window as he held his 2 of his children in his arms and a cigar in his hand. He was shot through the window. And even though someone was tried and convicted of his crime, everyone pretty much agrees that it was Dick Wyndham who was responsible for it. And his ghost, because he's all alone. So the other side of love is sadness, right? Is loneliness.
Right.
He loved his children so much. And his killer is so close to him that I feel that his ghost is trapped in this cemetery, right? He cannot find rest. He cannot find peace. But the area of that cemetery that he's buried near, now, if you go there, it's almost sad. Actually, creepily enough, my daughter actually hugged his grave because she was so sad when we got there because his family had to move away. And so he's literally buried by himself and there's nothing near him. except on the other side of the path from him is this little area known as Babyland.
Oh,
and Babyland is just what it sounds like. This cemetery was set up for people who didn't have a lot of money, areas of the cemetery, to bury their dead. And so this Babyland are all children who died before they were 3 years old. Most of them kind of were born stillborn, and they could have this area for free to bury their children. And so it's this whole area of these little tiny graves of children, of babies. And this dark figure, which very much matches the description of Marshal John Bowman, is said to walk and guard that section of the cemetery. And people hear that story, or they see that ghost at night, or they and then they kind of describe it. People show them pictures of Marshal Bowman, and they're like, yeah, like he's tall like that, he looks like that, but he's just kind of a shadow. And so it's interesting because here are two different men, both killed by the same person potentially, and both kind of have to deal with being buried near him, and both linger in that cemetery for different reasons.
Wow. I have a theory, though, that Marshal Bowman was shot by his wife just trying to put out the cigar. She was like, get out of the house with that, or uh-oh.
So he was killed. He was killed probably about a mile away, and it's now their old courthouse. They now have a new courthouse. And when we tripped that to try to spark energy, to try to kind of trigger things, we went to the location of the old Bloody Bucket, and we drank this really bad strawberry alcohol.
Any reason to drink, Balzano.
And I don't drink. Actually, I had strawberries, like fruit punch, because I don't drink at all, actually. And then we went to Marshal Bowman's old house, and we smoked cigars. And every single time that I've been to that cemetery, I always bring cigars and leave them at his grave.
There you go. And aggravate his wife. I can't remember. I think it's Fort Lauderdale. You have a haunted Waffle House, right?
Oh yeah. Oddly enough, there are quite a few haunted Waffle Houses.
Why not?
And
why not haunt a Waffle
and Perkins? Yeah, there are a lot of haunted Waffle Houses in Perkins here in Florida.
Oh my God, Chris, you are wonderful. Well, tell us the name of your book and where they can find it.
The book is called Haunted Florida Love Stories, and you can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your books. You can actually go to trippingonlegends.com, and you can even order it from there, like directly from the site. Or what I always say is go to our Facebook page, because that's kind of where we put all the fun stuff, and that's where we put the video versions of our episodes. So it's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. So you can get and honestly, you can probably save time and reading the book by just going and downloading the episodes that are about those stories.
No, but then how are we going to make you enough money to get out of Florida if you're not buying the book?
I actually heard I'm going to go to work at Stetson, so I think I'll be all set.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. You guys, I love Tripping on Legends. Give it a listen. And I just thank you for coming on, Chris. You're so entertaining and fabulous. So,
Karen, thank you very much for having me. I always love talking to you.
And hi to your daughter. And hey, everybody, thanks for listening. If you can give me a review wherever you are. And also thanks to Mike Flynn at Uno Rising Media. And we'll see you all next week.